Well, hello, and welcome to the Alpha Male Podcast. Today, we have a special guest. My favorite guest that I've ever had on the podcast, and by far the most beautiful, my wonderful wife, Christy. Would you like to say hello?
Hi!
So today we're going to talk about the struggles and some of the adventure and fun things of living off-grid and living tiny. Might call it like off-grid adventures or something, but that's what we're going to talk about today. That's how we live semi-nomadically and often doing large stints off-grid. And I thought there might be a subset of people out there that really enjoy this. Anyway, with that, I'm going to plug in the bio. If you want to skip it, skip around 3 minutes and 45 seconds to the topic. Who am I? A question we should all ask ourselves. I am, first and foremost, a servant of God, made in His very own image, a follower of Jesus Christ, a simple man called by God to the Great Commission to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Next, a little bit about my background and what God has allowed me to do and blessed me to do in life. Grew up what most would consider very poor in the backwoods of the southeastern and mid-Atlantic United States, hunting and fishing. Joined the Marine Corps at 17. Did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. So a decorated Marine Corps combat veteran. Infantry assaultman. After the combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also a veteran of law enforcement. I served with LAPD. I was a sworn peace officer, a cop for LAPD. I worked regular patrol assignments and more specialized assignments. One of those more specialized assignments was warrant service, fugitive recovery. Also had some other law enforcement roles. I am an FBI certified firearms instructor and been certified by another 3-letter government agency in a lot of firearms and training things. I've also been a private contractor, worked in the private sector, pertaining to tactics and gunfighting and protecting America from enemies foreign and domestic. I served as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters in a large metropolitan area. That was our primary mission, to stop active shooters, which sadly are a thing in America today. I've also been blessed to do quite a bit of competition shooting. Started my first formal competitions even before joining the Marine Corps at 17. I had won more shooting competitions than I can remember. I have competed in all manner of disciplines in shooting. I've been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion, West Coast regional champion. Like I said, been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Mentioned hunting. I've hunted to put meat on the table starting when I was a child. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide, hunting and slaying all manner of beast. And I don't apologize for that. Humbled to be the host of 3 podcasts. Simple Man Sermons, Alpha Male Podcast, and Gunfighter Life. Obviously, as things not mentioned, I've been blessed to do many other things. But, again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, a believer and follower of the Bible, the Word, Jesus Christ. And I don't apologize for that. With that, let's transition into today's topic. All right, so for those of you that don't know, my wife and I live a little bit different than most. little bit set apart than what most people live, especially here in America. How would you describe the way that we live?
I usually tell people that we're nomads or just that we move a lot.
Yeah, we do move a lot. I would say that we are nomads, neo-nomads, or neo-pioneers is a good way I've heard it put. But yeah, so when did we first start our off-grid adventuring together? I should say we did off-grid sessions before, but when did we start our together off-grid life?
I think we started sometime in 2021, and then we started moving much more frequently for the last few months.
Okay, yeah, so I'd say we started, it was like right around New Year's, right, of 2021, so right when 2021 started.
Yep.
So we're almost 2 years into this adventure, huh?
Indeed.
Great, hurrah! So as romantic as that sounds, living like a modern-day train-hopping hobo, there are some struggles that come with living off-grid, living nomadically. I guess I'll just ask you what you think those are, and if you miss some, or I'll expound if I think of some that you don't.
I think some of the things that I miss most about a stable place to stay would be the luxuries you get from a bigger place. So we live very small. It's part of how we travel so frequently. And with that, we have a very, very tiny kitchen.
Yeah. We don't go out to eat, right? We cook almost all. If friends or something want to go out to eat, we will, but almost exclusively we cook at home. And it's tiny. Like there is counter spaces measured in inches. Yeah.
So we used to cook together a lot, and now we're just frequently in the way. So either one person cooks or the other does. And it's totally sufficient to make a meal. It's just I miss the time where we got to spend together making meals.
Very sweet.
And then I think the next thing that I miss would be unlimited hot water.
Hot water.
A long shower, it just cannot be understated. We still have hot water the way that we live and frequent access to it, but the longest shower you can take is just a couple of minutes.
Yeah. And I would say off-grid is a sliding scale, right? So sometimes you live without power or water. Sometimes you live with just power. Sometimes you live with, a different sliding scale, right? We're not like Naked and Afraid. I've never seen that show, but we're not like out in the bush running around in silkies. That's not how we live. But I would say one of the biggest struggles going to the water thing is when we stay somewhere we don't have grid water and we have to haul up water. So that's quite the chore if you don't think about that ahead of time. I remember when we were living off-grid in Arizona, obviously there's not a lot of water around there naturally, so we literally would have to hook up the camper and haul it into town to fill it with water and then haul it back out into the wilderness, which was a giant pain in the butt. When we stayed other places in Oregon, we had these blue totes like you would think of as a jerry can full of water, I think 6 gallons, 5 gallons, 6 gallons. We would literally go to a creek or to a stream and fill those up and haul those, usually uphill, and fill up the camper. And that's a pain in the butt. It's not so bad if you plan it out and the weather's nice, but if you wake up in the middle of the night and you don't have water, you have to go down to the creek and get water. And guess where the mosquitoes are a lot? At the creek, right? So there's that. That is a struggle. Especially remember that place we stayed in when we very first got outside of Brookings, Oregon. And it was quite the haul. It was quite a steep cliff to haul water up and down.
It was, yeah. It was about 100 yards uphill.
Yeah, so think about that. Yeah, and you go through a lot more water than you would think. When you just have unlimited water, you're just like, ooh, let it rain. And you just water everywhere, just washing the dishes. But when you have to haul it up by hand, you're a lot more judicious with your use of water. I think I agree. That's a big thing for living off-grid.
Yeah, and that goes with other areas too, because not only does it mean your showers are probably shorter than you'd prefer, it also means that, like, this is a big one for me, that dishes have to pile up because you don't want to run the water for a single dish or 2 dishes. And then you just have stacks of dirty dishes that really can't be washed until you go haul more water. It's kind of a pain.
That doesn't bother me.
Yeah, I know.
So if you don't know about hot water, one of the good secrets of living off-grid that makes it way easier is propane. Propane, for what you get, is so much cheaper. I know it sounds romantic to build fires, and we like to build a fire and sit by a fire, but you don't want to have to do that all day. If you do, that's kind of a part-time job, keeping a fire going all the time. And you can do that, but propane is just so much easier, especially when it's raining, when the weather's nasty, to be able to take a hot shower. And we both have, bathed in a creek, bathed in the river, in the Rogue River and creeks. And that can be fun, but it's not as fun as it sounds day after day, especially when it's not warm out and you have to take a bath in a creek or a stream. It's not as fun as the Irish Spring commercials make it out to be, if you remember those. So having propane is a real big plus. Okay, so what do you think next for struggles living off grid?
Just moving the trailer itself can be an ordeal, because it's like it takes, there's a prep day to make sure everything is secured down or put on the floor, and inevitably it doesn't matter how much we pack or prepare. At the end of the trip, stuff is still everywhere. Something has broken, something has fallen off.
Yeah, we broke a Berkey recently, which is a water filter, if you don't know, a quite good one, and it fell and broke. And so yeah, we broke a Berkey. We've broken a number of things moving, and not just that, like getting everything hooked up is a pain in the butt. So yeah, it can be quite the ordeal to move. I agree. Something that you may not realize if you've never done it, but today's society is really kind of unsympathetic and very unaccommodating towards nomads. It's really hard to do some things without an address. Imagine trying to run a business without an address. Even just getting mail is an ordeal. For a long time, I fought Amazon because they're a big company and I'd rather do business with other people. But if they had the forethought to have those Amazon lockers, and if we're only going to be somewhere for 3 or 4 days, that's really the only way to get stuff, is to get it sent to an Amazon locker, and it usually ships in a couple of days. So for a nomad, that's, I guess, a tactical tip for nomads. If you're moving and you're going to be somewhere for a week, then that's really maybe your only chance, unless you find it in a brick and mortar store. And if you're places where I like to be, where a town of 3,000 is a giant metropolis that I just can't wait to get away from, then you might not find stuff in a brick and mortar. So Amazon and lockers is a big deal. What do you have to contribute?
Yeah, I would agree. One of the things that we run into occasionally are just how much shipping delays can wreak havoc on your travel plans, because let's say you have something planned to arrive on Monday and we're leaving on Tuesday. We now have to decide if the package gets delayed, if it's worth staying for, or if that is just a sunk cost, because we're not only not there to receive it, we're not there to return it either. Yeah,
that recently happened with a pair of pants, and I'm running low on pants, and I'm very specific about the pants that I wear. Like, jeans are for normal people, I don't wear those. But I ordered a pair of pants, and they didn't ship for like a week after we ordered them, because we didn't order them from Amazon, and we didn't get them, and I still don't have them. It is what it is.
And I know that it's possible to send things to USPS locations, right? I'm sure that's somebody that would comment and say that it's possible to ship things directly to the Postal Service. That's a very common thing if you're hiking long distances on trails and whatnot, where you just ship things to your next Postal Service. And that can be done for short periods of time, but if you're going to be there for a week or two, and depending upon how many packages you get, it can really make the Postal Service angry. So just, trying to not too burden the people that live there regularly. There's no easy way to get mail aside from an Amazon locker, really, if you're living nomadically.
Plus, you have to know where you're going. If you're like us and we're just winging it, like, maybe we'll be in Michigan, maybe we'll be in Florida, maybe we'll be in Oregon again. We don't really have a plan wherever God allows us to go. So, yeah, that only works if you know where you're going to be. And if we don't,
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so what next is a struggle for living tiny and mobily?
I think this is probably more for me than for you, because I tend to have more clothes. But off-season wear, if, let's say, the season changes, and so I put all of my summer clothes away, and then it's fall, and then we have a really hot spell, I have to decide if it's worth lifting everything out of the camper to get to the clothes. Because typically on your off-season clothes, you have to put them in storage, and there's only so many ways that you can access the storage. And since there are a lot of other things we access more often, like Michael's ammo, the generator, our tools, those things are easiest to access, which means off-season clothes get put kind of buried behind all the rest of that. So if I go on, let's say, a trip somewhere, so like I just went out of town, and this out of town was a lot warmer, so I was like, oh, I'll grab my shorts and my bathing suit, and it's such an ordeal to pull it out. It's not like, again, when we were living in the city and I just pulled something off of the top shelf, like it takes over an hour to get to it by the time I have to lift everything off and whatever else. So
yeah,
it's inconvenient. Although it's not the worst thing. It's certainly nice to be able to have that stuff. And the other flip side of that is that we're constantly evaluating what we can get rid of. I feel like every other stop, I'm like, what can I throw away?
Yeah, and it seems like we live tiny, right? We live around 150 square feet, and we still have so much stuff.
Yeah.
Like, and we constantly get rid of it, and it makes you realize that the average American has so much stuff. Like, I have so much stuff I barely even use. I forgot about one of my guns, a 22, and I'm ashamed to say it got rusty. Like, because it's just one of the guns I generally have a backup to my go-to 22. And I don't have a ton of guns. You might think as a host of Gunfighter Life I have a ton, but I don't have that many. And that thing was covered in rust, and just because we just have so much stuff. Yeah. It's hard to... If you think about the stuff you use on a daily basis, for most people it's probably 10% of the stuff that you own you actually use on a daily basis. Right?
Yeah. And we've done studies that show heat maps of like where people live in their house and where they actually, spend their time. And the majority of people spend their time in like 2 rooms.
Oh, yeah. We have 1 room, so we're doing pretty good. The other struggles I will talk about is working from home. That can be a struggle. We both work from home. Christy right now is renting office space because of the struggles, and I'll let her talk about that. But for me, I'm a little bit more flexible as doing this full-time as a podcaster. If you like this podcast and you want to support it, become a patron. I'd be a bad capitalist if I didn't mention that. But I can just basically, if I get ahead on my podcast, which I like to stay ahead, I can just go somewhere with decent service once a week and upload. And I can literally live off-grid. I generally try to get somewhere with service every couple of days if I'm doing that, because I have a Patreon chat group where we get to talk to each other and help each other out. Iron sharpens iron. Every couple of days I'll try and talk to them. But other than that, I can go and just come in once a week and upload my podcasts. And I'm totally fine living like a wild man off-grid in the wilderness. But Christy doesn't have that luxury. So talk a little bit about your struggles with living and what we found that works and doesn't work.
Sure. So I'm very fortunate in my job. I have a company that's completely supportive of a nomadic lifestyle. They let me work fully remote. And only care, that my job gets done. But some of the responsibilities that I have require video conferencing, and video conferencing requires a lot of bandwidth, which means I often can't do it from, let's say we're staying at like an RV park. Their Wi-Fi is just used by so many people that it doesn't support video conferencing. So like even if we stayed at a populated place, I'm actually less likely to be able to work from home than if we stayed at, let's say, an Airbnb or a hip camp location where I can just use like a residential Wi-Fi system. So it's not uncommon for us to have to stay near a bigger city so that I can rent a co-working space, which is a little bit unfortunate that, I have the ability to work from home but really end up having to pay to rent an office space. It's well worth the sacrifice, I would say, to be able to move around and explore this beautiful country. But it is something that we have to logistically fit into our plans. And then also, just because I have to use a co-working space to work doesn't necessarily mean that that's the city that we're staying in. So occasionally that can mean that I'm commuting very long distances to get to work. Let's say, Michael finds a place out in the wilderness that's beautiful and by a creek and definitely a place that we think is worth staying and worth exploring.
And free.
but the nearest city is 40 minutes away, it means that I now have a 40-minute commute to and from this beautiful location, which I know many of you who live in a city have to do every single day, but that's not something that we signed up for whenever we when we decided we wanted to live nomadically. We were trying to get away from that lifestyle, and kind of ironically, it finds its way back sometimes.
Yeah. And then another struggle is, why did you pick such a big dog to live tiny? No, we have if you guys don't follow us, we have last we weighed him, 110-pound Rhodesian Ridgeback puppy that is still growing, I think. And that's quite a fun thing in a little tiny camper.
Michael asked me what the largest dog I could lift would be. This was like one of the defining criteria when we were picking out an animal, when we were picking out a dog specifically. And I told him I could lift comfortably, I believe, 80 to 85 pounds. I think after that I would struggle. So if the dog ever got hurt, if I ever needed to lift it into a vehicle, get it out of a situation, that anything over 80 or 85 pounds, I would struggle to do alone. And so that was the maximum threshold for a dog. And we found a breed standard that had that maximum threshold, but definitely not a breeder with that maximum threshold.
Yeah.
So
Alexander Hamilton's a little bit bigger than average, but he's such a good dog. He's
so good.
He's laying down right now behind us, just chilling, having a good day, getting to hang out with us. So we may think of some other things, but I think now we'll transition to what we like and what are the great blessings we are blessed to enjoy about the lifestyle that we live now. So go ahead.
So I think one of my number one things that I really enjoy with this lifestyle is the fact that we are kind of forced to spend so much quality time together. If you listen to some of our previous episodes, I think we did one on our favorite books. Quality time is definitely my love language, and this forces Michael to be in the same room as me all of the time.
Yeah.
Which, don't get me wrong, we can definitely get on each other's nerves. And there's definitely times where one or the other has to leave the camper to go to work or just to be outside because the other one has to concentrate. But in general, it's really nice just having the opportunity to be forced to be around somebody that you love.
Yeah. Forced quality time, still quality time, huh?
Sometimes, yeah.
I love you. So, yeah, that's a big one. We're very blessed to have that. Another one I would say, the big one is we get to travel. That was kind of the point the reason we did this. We weren't really sure. We knew we didn't want to live in the area that we were. Neither one of us, well, I should say I'm from Virginia, she's from Florida. Neither one of us really want to be there. So we kind of wanted to take this time to just travel and see the country and see where we might want to live and where we may not want to live. And I don't know if we'll get into that because that may not apply to you. The things that we like may have nothing to do with the things that you like. Or we're wrestling right now back and forth about what's an acceptable size town. I think 150 people or less is just perfect, and she thinks about 150,000 people or more is just about perfect. So,
that's not exactly right.
No, but we're somewhere in that range. But some people like the big cities. Some people like to go out to eat. Maybe you want to live nomadically and try all the different restaurants in fancy towns. You're going to have a far different route than us. But we get to travel and see the country. We've gotten to see some beautiful, beautiful places in the country. We just recently were about 6 hours away from Yellowstone. So this past weekend, we took a weekend. Actually took a couple of days off work like most people do every week. But generally we take one day off work a week. We took a couple of days and we drove out to Yellowstone, which was gorgeous, perfect time of year. There wasn't a ton of people. It was a balmy 14 to 17 degrees. It was beautiful, and we got to really experience that and enjoy it. It was great, and we did it at a moment's notice because we were nearby. We've gotten to see the West Coast, the Oregon coast. We got to drive up the Oregon coast, spend all summer on the Oregon coast we didn't need heat. We didn't need AC. It was beautiful temperature, beautiful weather. We got to see some beautiful things. Exploring the Rogue River, going and foraging and learning about all kinds of new plants. And now, God willing, we're headed to Michigan for some reason, to Detroit. No, her family's there. She's really close to. We get to travel. That's a one of the major reasons we wanted to do this. That's great. A lot of people never do that, or if they do it when they're so old that they may not get to do a lot of the things that we like to do.
Yeah, my grandpa and my grandparents actually, saved money their whole life for when they retired, and their whole goal after retirement was just to travel and see the world. And then come retirement age, my grandma decided she didn't want to travel, so they didn't go anywhere. And unfortunately, they never ended up traveling to see the world, right? Despite saving their entire life for it. And I think a number of things can happen as you age, right? Tomorrow is never a guarantee. So you don't know if your money's still going to be there. You don't know if you're still going to have the desire, the ability to travel later. So it's something that we definitely prioritized at this point in our life. At this point in our life, we don't have any kids together. We don't have, we both have remote jobs. So, and part of that is by design, right? That we are taking risks actively right now in order to pursue something that's important to us, which is traveling. And it's been really great to be able to see the different areas of the country, to explore big towns, small towns, to figure out what we like, what we don't like, how big is too big, how small is too small, all those things that, before it was kind of, we would have to speak theoretically on it, and now, we're putting it in a practical application. We'll be in a city and ask, is this too big? Is this too small? We'll look at a house or pieces of property and decide, is this somewhere that we want to live? It's no longer theory, it's practice.
Yeah, culture. And culture is vastly different if you spent your whole life in the South, as we both did. Yes, Virginia is the South. But if you spend your whole life like in the South, you may not realize there's parts, regions of the country with entirely different cultures, and you may like that better or worse. We really like some cultures better than others, and we would know that if we didn't actually experience it. Going somewhere for a weekend, I don't think, is really sufficient to grasp the culture. If you live there for a couple of weeks, a month, a couple of months, I think you really get to experience that culture, and that's really cool. Even if we decide that's not a culture we like, at least we've experienced it.
Right.
I'd also say that we're both, I guess you would call it, nomadic souls. I like the freedom of, hey, we're not digging this place, let's go. Like, we don't want to stay here. Maybe we're planning on staying here longer, but it's not for us. We're going to get out of here. We're not tethered. We're not tied down. We're not chained down. We're strangers and pilgrims on the earth. We all are. This earth is none of ours, not mine or not yours. It's not our permanent home. We are wanderers on the earth anyway. And it's nice to have that freedom, at least for a time, to be able to wander and be like, oh, let's go here. Like, you want to go for the end of November, or you want to be with your family in Michigan, and you want to spend a winter with your family in Florida because you've been away since you were young. And that's fantastic, and we can just do that. A lot of people can't do that. Or they could go for a vacation for a week. We can just be like, oh, we're going to go to Florida, and when we get tired of it, we'll leave. So.
Yeah, I would agree that the ability to leave a place that you don't like is much easier for us. I think sometimes, especially if your whole family is there, your friends are there, your work is there. A lot of times there's these perceived barriers that lock you down into a place. But for us, we don't have any of those. We know that everywhere we go is going to be temporary. While we are actively searching for, where in the country we may want to live and start a future, if we end up in a place and think, well, this sucks, then we just go. We just pack up and we go. The worst thing that'll happen is we lose the rest of the month's worth of, rent if we secured a place, or, maybe some small financial sacrifice. But in general, we don't have a mortgage. We don't have a house we need to sell. We just pack up and we leave.
Yeah. We should point out a big reason we're able to do this is that both of us paid off our debt and have savings. By God's grace, we're very blessed that we don't have any debt. So if you're looking to do this lifestyle, I would not encourage you to be in debt anyway. A borrower is a slave to the lender, the Bible says. But we both got out of any debt that we have. And we have savings. So I would encourage you, whether or not you want to live nomadically, number one, get out of debt and get some savings, because you never know what happens in life. But that allowed me to walk away from a very good full-time management position twice, because even though the money was good, the abundance of your life is not measured in money. It really isn't. And a far less income and digging into savings, we're able to do that because we don't have debt. We have older vehicles that we've paid off. that we either bought outright or paid off, and we don't have debt, and we have a legitimate amount of savings by God's grace. So we have the freedom to do that. If you're literally a slave to your lender and you can't just leave everything and go, that's a different story. So I'd say that's the first thing if this appeals to you. And I agree that I guess I recognize that this lifestyle is not appropriate for everybody. There's a big chunk that this sounds horrible to them.
And I would also note that living the lifestyle that we live is certainly not worth going into debt for.
Oh, no.
So, I know Instagram is, people live their whole Instagram lives, right, where, they travel and it looks really cool and it looks like it's lots of money, and then people think this is the route for them. That's not the lifestyle that we live. We are definitely living our best life and exploring and doing the things. But we're doing it on a budget that we can afford, and doing, honestly, things that probably interest us more than what would get followers on Instagram. But that being said, I don't think it would be worth it if we had to get out a giant loan for the camper and then buy a brand new truck to pull the camper, and then we overspent what we were making every month and that type of thing. Like it's balance sheets are two parts, right? It's what you make and then also what you spend. And fortunately, Michael and I are both, very aligned in, we are always spending less than what we're making, regardless of, travel or anything else that we have going on. At this point in our lives, we have zero debt. We have no car loans. We have no mortgage. There's no student debt. There's no anything, which is part of how we have the financial freedom to travel.
Yeah. So there's that. Another thing I will bring up is if you live on the East Coast, which is the majority of people that live in America, I can't speak to other places. I have been to Europe and stuff, but I'm talking about Americans. If you go west of the Mississippi, especially like west of Texas, there's a thing called public land. And it's a beautiful thing. It means it belongs to the public. It belongs to everybody. And that might blow your mind if you're from the Northeast or New England or the South. But there's literally millions of acres of national forest and wilderness that we can just stay on for 2 weeks at a time. And it's beautiful, and it's free, and it's not breaking any laws, and it belongs to everybody. And that's a great resource that belongs to you if you're an American, that you should really take advantage of, whether it's just a long weekend or hunting or fishing or just going out into the wilderness to pray. It's such a great thing that you have access to, and it would be a shame if that interests you to never take advantage of it. And this is the way we talked about our long stints in the wilderness. I'll literally go do some recon, do some scouting, and find an area, and we'll live there for 2 weeks. And then we will move to the next place and live there for 2 weeks, or we'll be in the wilderness for a couple of weeks, go to town for a couple of days to get a nice long shower and resupply on victuals, and then we'll go back out in the wilderness and do it again. And that's a great resource that you have just as much right to as I do.
BLM land is something you could leverage even if you're not going living a nomadic lifestyle. I was just chatting with one of my friends the other day who had a trip planned out to Zion. We won't talk too much about Zion. It's definitely not Michael's favorite place. But in her trip out to Zion, she was worried because a lot of the campgrounds are first come, first serve, and they have long lines in order to be reserved. So she was worried about not having a place to sleep. And so we just talked about how there's BLM land literally right outside at the gates. Like you just bring your sleeping bag and camp anywhere you want. So, I mean, again, even if you're not living a nomadic lifestyle, BLM land is something, public land is something that's, available to you and as a resource. And we would encourage you to know about it, to leverage it. Yeah. So Michael's going to let me do the tactical tip for this episode. And my tactical tip would be, if you've never heard of it, you should definitely look into Gym Pass. Gym Pass is something that's offered usually through employers, although I get mine through my insurance. And it's an app that you can download where you pay for a single membership tier, and there's various tiers depending on what type of gym you want access to. And the app will let you access any gym who has signed up for Gym Pass in your area. So what that allows us to do as we live nomadically is it allows us to join, a Snap Fitness in Flagstaff and a Planet Fitness in Oregon and a Crunch Fitness in Idaho. And just kind of as we bounce around, whether we're in Lake Tahoe or Tampa, Florida, we can open the app and see which gyms are available in our tier. And if needed, we can upgrade a tier maybe to access a better gym. So lower tiers are going to have like just, your basic stuff, your Crunch Fitness, your Gold's Gym, your that type of thing. Upper tiers could have even things like Orange Theory, bar, more specialized stuff, CrossFit, that type of thing. But yeah, so that's the tactical tip is look up Gym Pass, especially if you travel at all. Even if you're not living nomadically, if you're on a flight between, Tampa and Detroit or between San Antonio and New York, you might actually have a lot of gyms in your area on Gym Pass, and this will allow you to leverage them all without signing up for a contract with just one of them. And then also, it's only a month-to-month membership, so anytime it stops working for you, you can just cancel.
That's a great tactical tip, Eva. Thank you.
Welcome.
What you've all been waiting for, I hope, the tactical verse of the day. They all died in faith, not having received the promise, but seeing it afar off. For they declared plainly that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For if they had been mindful of the country from whence they came, they may have been permitted to return. But as it were, they sought a better country, a heavenly country, where God would not be ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. Anyway, with that, thanks for listening to this special episode and our special guest.
Our special guest?
Special guest. Have a blessed day, guys.